I was born in the early 60s, 1961. I want you to contrast the last 60 years with the 60 years that happened prior to my birth. So 1900 to 1960 and then 1960 to present.
Well, you sort of alluded to it, Kevin. If the best way I think to maybe make this concrete for folks is you think about what the average American house looked like at 3 points in time: 1900, 1960, and 2020. That would be 60 years gaps between either of those, or you could say 2023, same thing. In 1900, there was no electrification. America hadn't been electrified yet. You didn't have a refrigerator. You didn't have a car. You didn't have a television. You can think about 1900 as almost sort of a jumping off point between the time that was and the time that now is. And there were all these advances that then happened in the early 20th century. By 1960, the whole country effectively had been electrified. I mean, you think about what it took to bring electricity to every house in this country by 1960. I mean, just a tremendous boom period. There was a car in every garage. There were televisions. There were radios. There was jet air travel by that time, just barely. Commercial jet air travel, that age was about to kick off in 64, 65. But it was, quite a different world for the average person in 1960. The suburbs had been built after World War II. It was just a very, very different world than those people who were buying houses in the 50s and 60s after the war. It was a really different world than the world that they had grown up with, and a very different world than the world that their parents had grown up in. And you've kind of jumped forward now from the early 60s to the early 2020s, and you say, well, how have things changed in the last 60 years? And this is sort of a mark of the progress or lack of progress. And we have electricity, and we have refrigerators, and we have TVs, and we have cars in the garage. And, things have changed over that 60 years for sure. The big change is that there are tablets, there are computers, cell phones, as you say, streaming services. That's a major change, for good or ill. I think there's a bit of both. But the only other difference is maybe there's two cars in the garage instead of one, but a car's a car. There's maybe more than one television, and it's a flat screen. It's not a big tube TV. And the refrigerator maybe is, I don't know, it's a double Sub-Zero instead of an old Westinghouse or something. But the point is that at the margin have been improvements for sure. That the refrigerators today are better, though they don't last as long as the ones that were made 60 years ago. But there's not the fundamental newness. Like, there's not that fundamental new technology.
There's no flying cars. There's no wow. I watch 1923 and I watch 1883, and I see massive differences between 1883 and 1923, the precursors to Yellowstone. And I see massive differences between 1923 and when I was a little kid. But I don't see massive differences other than the cell phone and things have gotten smaller and maybe more efficient in some ways. But in general, we don't have the Jetson lifestyle. We don't have the Back to the Future. We're supposed to have hoverboards, right? And we don't even have those. So I see your point. We have not had the innovation breakthroughs on the big scale that we used to have.
God, I'm so glad you brought up 1923. So I'm not a huge Yellowstone fan. Please don't stone me. But I love 1883 and 1923. It's kind of like that meme you see sometimes online, how it started and how it's going. And there's a great scene in 1923 where they go into town. It's kind of what we're talking about. And there's a guy there selling washing machines in front of a store, and he explains how, and this is the way the washing machines were originally sold. They were sold as a rental. And one of the cowboys, I can't remember which one it was, he's kind of screws up his face after the guy explains to him, like, well, we'll give you this now, but then you pay us whatever, $5 a month forever. And he's like, well, if I do that, I guess I'm save time, but then I work for you, right? And I just thought that was like, that was obviously a very intentional line in the movie, and it kind of points to what we're talking about, like. People haven't advanced the technology very quickly, but where a lot of time and effort has gone in, more than in the 20s, is like, how do you take the same technology and basically enslave people to it and make sure that you can milk money out of them forever? It's kind of like software as a service, right? Everything, it's like you used to be able to just go buy Microsoft Word. Now they want to sell it to you for $10 a month. And it's not that it's gotten any better. It's just they figured out that they have a monopoly. And now you just become kind of a tax cow for them in just a way that you're working for Microsoft or you're working for these other companies. And that does not lead to better outcomes. It doesn't lead to better living standards.